南无梭西，南无大摩西梭哈，南无曼珠西，南无梭西，南无大摩西梭哈。也只能做也就能来，想就满足那些要求其大概学年级别从哪里，到那边去上节都把说上去，给到自己说那来，想就满足那些要求其大概学年级别从哪里，到那边去上节都把说上去，给到自己说那来，想就满足那些要求其大概学年级别从哪里，到那边去上节都把说。所学别个修行没多少，只让你心里点点发心，上进心都没得破，都别让到心来去发修，一到普通人那门大大方的呀大呀。我们的心里的确定的是不差，这为了到底是喜欢个地方的交代方面，这个方式吧，就是嘛，希望的。让到国内这个中央把信用的第一个非常就是什么的，给我的第一就给我不是说的这个正面的，这个群体，这个高的时候，那些他们的信息的是情报的人士。
Please adjust your sitting posture according to 7 meditative postures of Vairochana. Think, all sentient beings have been my mothers. All sentient beings have been my mothers, not just once, but for numberless times. They are as kind as my mothers in this life. Even though all kind mothers and sentient beings want happiness and do not want even a small suffering. However, due to engaging wrongly in objects of adoptions and abandonment, they only experience suffering. In our mind, sincerely generate loving kindness towards all kind mothers and sentient beings, thinking, how nice it would be if all kind mothers and sentient beings were to have happiness and the causes of happiness, that is virtue. If all kind mothers and sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, I will cause all kind mothers and sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
Just the ordinary just when the use it and you see the one of the region and did it to our the so check it out the region that you can see.
Next, we generate compassion towards all suffering mothers and sentient beings, thinking, how nice it would be if the bodies of all suffering mothers and sentient beings were free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue, such as physical pain, sickness, and problems caused by four elements. May the bodies of all suffering mothers and sentient beings be free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. I will free the bodies of all suffering mothers and sentient beings from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so. How nice it would be if the minds of all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue, such as fear, and all poison subtle negative discursive thoughts. May the minds of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Or free the minds of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so. How nice it would be if the speech of all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue, all coarse and subtle negative speech, such as telling lies. May the speech of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Or free the speech of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so. How nice it would be if the three doors of all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. May the three doors of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. How free the three doors of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so. How nice it would be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and causes of suffering, that is non-virtue. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and causes of suffering. I will free all sentient beings from suffering and the causes of suffering. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so. Next, we generate bodhicitta. First, we ask ourselves, who should take on the responsibility to free all mother sentient beings from the sufferings of samsara and of low realms? I should take on the responsibility to free all mother sentient beings from the sufferings of samsara and of lower realms. Even though I should take on the responsibility, but I do not have the ability to do so now. Who has such abilities? Those perfectly complete enlightened Buddha have the abilities to do so. Therefore, for the sake of all mother sentient beings, by all means, I will achieve the precious state of enlightenment.
也就是说，团体这个上就是不到个小我的那个是工作吧，给你同这个待遇就我是没办法去弄就，所以大家很多这个东方人说社交这个很可能是他们一个团体不是可能这个的那么去的就是啥，所以把给你推荐那个时间。
Next, we generate all-encompassing yoga mind, the aspiring conventional bodhicitta that thinks, for the sake of all mother sentient beings, I will achieve the state of enlightenment. These transform into a complete mundis at one's heart. And the ultimate bodhicitta, that is one's mind becoming in one taste with emptiness, the lack of inherent existence. These transform into a white five-pronged vajra on top of the mundis.
就是到我的讲，你这个其他的讲，我这个上这个东西，这个我们也从事关系。
Next, we meditate on emptiness for a short while, that I exist neither intrinsically one with, nor intrinsically different from the aggregates. Thus, I am empty of intrinsic existence.
我是觉得历史上的就是快点的历史的以前的说法，我们和他是的，因为我是蛮多些，不这个也上不是搞结果的，其实对我的另外的叫一切都啥的，我是要这个多一点，第一个也上过的区别给他的，我的这个不行还是有的是。
As I've mentioned, always that it is very important and beneficial to conjoin the roots of virtue that we do through our three doors with the practice of six perfections. Thus, to conjoin these roots of virtue with the practice of six perfections, the first one is generosity. The nature of generosity is an intention of giving. Thus, these 2 hours of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma is for the sake of purifying the suffering and achieving the happiness of all sentient beings.
当然就是，这时候呢是不是的，这个我是蛮多些，我说也上过这地理告诉，我如果你进入吧，是我怎么就，也光新的话呢，上不是要比7万以内，那你上不是就给他的，管他这个不是哪是哪是。
Next is morality. Morality is the minds of abandonment. And in these 2 hours of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma, I will properly abandon my physical and verbal negativities so that they do not manifest these 2 hours.
那时候的我就，我这个时候是我是个东西，关键上不是基本告诉我是理性了，当然的等于刚才就为了对碰到里面些土把去要不就为了。Next
is patience. Patience is an undisturbed mind. In these 2 hours of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma, whatever physical or mental hardships there is, I will patiently accepting them.
我第一是我的真的说的，就我注意身份，真的是我什么东西。那面上不是就是那个面上不是结果这个高的特别对不对？面上不是基本真的怎么样呢？上不是基本给这个真的是把你拿来是认识。
Next is joyous effort. Joyous effort is a mind that takes delight in virtue. I will delightfully engage in the virtue of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma.
而且就是嘛，是上帝是我的设计的，包括设计的那个上帝是我是嘛这些，而那上个是级别开始，设的难度的难用的难度，而那上个是级别比小娃的那个设的要设计的那这个一样，而第一个那上个是级别在的，那上帝是发现的这些东西。
Next is meditative concentration. Meditative concentration is a mind that single-pointedly focuses on any virtuous object. So I will single-pointedly focus my mind on the intended object without being influenced by discursive thoughts and distractions.
我学的时候呢，我就觉得南边就是个写东西，就是什么东西，什么东西，而那上个是级别。现在这可能因为兴趣完了吧，这要不就写东西就没了。那那上个是级别给在的，都写东西不是那种事情的事。
Last one is wisdom. Wisdom is a knower that thoroughly distinguishes phenomena. I will properly and correctly understand the words and the meanings of the teachings that I listen to, contemplate, and meditate on.
这就是黑世界，他们这个上帝怎么说？理解了，这他们最深，我呢，这个今天最深的看到这个，这都是这样的，就是。
Set a good motivation. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I will achieve the state of enlightenment. For this purpose, I'm going to listen to the precious teachings and practice accordingly in order to benefit sentient beings. Yeah. So I will first talk about the modes of asserting object possessors.
我们已经就是这个，就工作了，也到底我在工作给自己的，工作了里面的，工作了什么的字，我在里面去他们的说，这工作这里，我说有点就是的，这个我说，让你把这刚才的这一点已经拿去做这个了吧，已经拿去我这里去这个了，感觉我这些，不管我了，不管我工作定的。那自己把这个资金交到了，那些把这个资金就不要了，那些时候他把这个资金就不要了，把这个资金时候那是通过，不过我搞了点，他不拿账记录啊，不是对不对？轮到我第二年说，不咋地，我们记录啊。
So Prasangika assert the mere I imputed in dependence on the 5 aggregates as illustrations of the person, and person is necessarily a non-associated compositional factors. So when we study Svalantika Madhyamika, so Svalantika Madhyamika asserts a mental consciousness as the person, as illustrations of the person. So however, for Prasangika, they assert the mere I imputed in dependence on any of the 5 aggregates as the illustrations of the person. And they Prasangika do not assert mental consciousness as the illustration of the person.
那这个是吧？搞这个里面理性强的这个，里面理性你说的，刚才本部的细胞看有没有理性强过吧？也可以不没有理性，里面理性强过，我从那个说吧，这些可能没有理性的里面理性强过吧？里面理性这样子的，本部我的细胞还是了，是吧？都是的，要别的搞这个里面理性也是。
And it says in the text, a person is necessarily a non-associated compositional factor. So previously, when we talked about non-associated compositional factors, it means that it is a compositional factor that is neither a matter nor consciousness. So a person is necessarily a non-associated compositional factors means that person is neither matter nor consciousness.
理解吧？当然，看到了前面的情理论，他的我们知道，我们自己知道的，前面的情理论你有个不解是吧？然后前面的我是我自己前就是我的前面的，也基本就像什么，对我那个我会这样子。
So Prasangika's assertions on two kinds of mind or awareness. So it's similar to a lower school, similar to two kinds of valid cognizers. So it's also similar to lower schools as well. So there are two kinds of mind or awareness. So the first one is valid cognizers, and the second one is non-valid cognizers. So there are two kinds of valid cognizers. Valid direct perceivers, in other words, direct valid cognizer, and valid inferential cognizers, in other words, inferential valid cognizer.
前面如果不能够是前面的，就是我的前面你，你基本的好了吧？看到哪里有什么对吧？那实际为什么当然这里我们我感觉，那哪里前面那把的，那哪里经济我们对吧？这个这个图也是什么？经济吧，根本那个经济对吧？经济不要往给他看到哪里去的，我们也是，对吧？看到我地基了，对吧？他。
So Prasangika do not assert self-cognizing direct perceivers. In other words, self-knowing direct perceivers. So the reason why Prasangika do not assert self-knowing direct perceivers is because they do not assert the establishment by way of its own character.
他讲的实际就往去了，就是我的，你去的，那就是了，这么的你有是到地方就是吧？
Sense consciousnesses in sentient beings' continuums are necessarily mistaken consciousness. Mental consciousnesses and yogic perceivers can be either mistaken or non-mistaken.
你刚刚这个是什么嘛？都就是那什么修的，咱们前面说的肯定是小不是吧？那谈出来的前面说的，没里边大多不行，前面说的没里边的情是，那点没说吧？
So to identify the definitions of a valid cognizer in Prasangika system, so Prasangika asserts the definitions of a valid cognizer as a knower, an incontrovertible knower, an incontrovertible knower. So it's very short.
我当然说，你当然嘛，是因为俺是到地方就是我是呢，那前面的情的，啥都没里边俺是哪里知道啊？ 啥都没里边情是那个有啊，他谈出来了，啥都是没乱是吧？就就是讲不要嘛，他就不要嘛，前面那个啥情里不要嘛是吧？啥都没乱里边就是没不要嘛是情里，啥都没里边情那为让我嘛，我的谈出来都不要嘛，谈出来没里，把情当然干的东西。
Like in lower schools, Sautrantika, for example, so they assert the definitions of a valid cognizer as a new incontrovertible knower, right? So, however, for Prasangika, that newly feature, the word newly is not necessary. So they only assert an incontrovertible knower as the definitions of a valid cognizer.
那这里边前面说的句子还好点个，我说知道我嘛是了，啥都没里边情是。 啥都的，没了的，是把电送掉了，不把人要生活的话，啥都去把那个机器什么一个电，或者机器什么嘛，还是那个，啥都去吧，是吧？啥都去，没了去把这一地什么一把，一地什么一把，这种人是吧？一地什么一把，就一这个人来说是吧？这个我就，他里边去把的，一地嘛是单独的，开工了，往电了，什么电的话什么一把，是吧？没去把的开工，一，哦，一地。 那就是什么的，每个阶段是吧？那里边些吧，我们是基本，到我们基本什么那个你觉得我不知道吧？我们是觉得里边些吧，我们是基本什么一个基本的也是，
知道吗？我那地方不出现吧？那什么？
什么开始我了，知道吗？是吧？我们是基本什么开始我了，基本什么一个，也是当然很多地方，我们希望因为啥都没了，准备过来就是可以讲，但是我学这样的知识的话。
So as a reminder, previously when we learned about the definition of a valid cognizer, we say that it is new controvertible knower, right? So there are key parts in these definitions. So the word new, incontrovertible, and knower. So they are a reason why these three features are included or as a part is a part of the definitions of a valid cognizer for lower schools. So the reason is by saying new, it eliminates subsequent cognizer from being a valid cognizer. So this is the purpose. So by saying the word new, it eliminates subsequent cognizer from being a valid cognizer. By saying incontrovertible, it eliminates correctly assuming consciousness, doubting consciousness, wrong consciousness from being a valid cognizer. Like for example, a correctly assuming consciousness is controvertible with regard to its object. So by saying the word incontrovertible, it eliminates correctly assuming consciousness, doubting consciousness, and wrong consciousness from being a valid cognizer. And also the third part, a knower. So knower, by saying the word knower, it eliminates the physical sense power from being a valid cognizer. So in Vaibhashika system, Vaibhashika do assert physical sense power as a valid cognizer. So by saying the word knower in the definitions of valid cognizer, it eliminates physical sense power from being a valid cognizer.
다 단주하게 세마등하다 딱 되보시 좋다. 그 뭐로 이거도 진이 딱 되보래. 간다 스타트 좀 러브에 치료 말에 그거 이거 말에 다 단주하. 이거는 가서 더 엄하게 스타트 러브를 다 지게 제마 말에 러브로 단주하게 지게 제마는 거예요. 이게 제마. 단주하고 제마 인간 미 있어야 뭐로 이거 진이 러브디 너무 지다지 이렇게라 제마 숨마서 간다 제마 인간 미 있어야 돼. 너무 지다지 이렇게라 제마 이나 제마 있어. 그게 또
진당이 이유라.
단지라 제마 이나 그라 땅에 제마 있어.
진당이 이유라 미루와.
상이라 물어봐. 이라 물어 이제 진당이라 제마로 와. 이거 이라 물어봐. 됐어. 진당이 이유가 지도 사실은 나 유도라 물어봤어. 우리 넣어야 돼. 나도 유도자 랑 스타트 유도 유도데 이거인데. 우리 유도라 난 너희가 이제 시오로 이게 또 세워지 그 지나 지역에 이제 간다 이 시와는 시도를 내고 와 뭐랑 이또서 뭐 자와이나 이스로 시대가는 뭐도 뒤단데 커도 되나도 내가 기타 진이에서 그거 그래서 다 쉬운 거 이 뭐니가 따로 그러면 이지만 내가 소리요 와
랑이 진당이 이유라 미루와이나 대체마리 랑이 진당이 이유라
이거 또는 뭐와 신경도 자와 그래서 이거 또는 뭐와 지금 뭐와
랑이 진당이 이유做
我做了
랑이 이유 做啦呀那랑이 진당이 이유 做
也做了
랑이 做
也做的지가 지나
랑이 진당이 이유로 니 루와이나 대체마리 루와이나 대체마 말이
我这里我们那人家知道觉得了啊你如果超出那真没意思是吧让知道觉得了
랑이 진당이 이유라
我让知道觉得了什么不如我呢
대체마리
yes 我的你说我
So, however, for Prasangika, they assert an incontrovertible knower as the definition of a valid cognizer. So, is comparatively shorter than those asserted in lower schools. So, there is no need to. So, in the definition of a valid cognizer asserted by Prasangika, so the word new is not necessary. It's not necessary, or there's no need to include the word new in the definitions of a valid cognizer, because for Prasangika, Prasangika assert that a subsequent cognizer is a valid cognizer. So previously, when we talk about the definitions of a valid cognizer in the lower schools, by saying the word new, it eliminates the subsequent cognizer from being a valid cognizer, right? So, however, for Prasangika assert that a subsequent cognizer is a valid cognizer. So whether it is a valid cognizer or not, it depends on whether it is controvertible or incontrovertible with regard to its objects of modes of the apprehension. Previously, when we learned about objects, then we talked about appearing object, we talked about objects of engagement, we talk about objects of determined object or determining object as well. So for Prasangika, whether it becomes a valid cognizer or not, it depends on whether it is incontrovertible with regard to its objects of modes of apprehensions or not, object of the modes of apprehension, or in other words, the object of engagement. So if it is incontrovertible with regard to its object of the modes of apprehension, then it is a valid cognizer. If it is controvertible with regard to its object of the modes of comprehension, then it is not a valid cognizer.
Well, that's him. That's him. Sema ida miso ata tire pangarwa. Sema sewa da kanda rangi. Zita jiyo tela. Zita jiyo de to baina. Sheba kangi la kanda zita jiyo de to baina sema hiso kanda. Zita jiyo de to Sheba kangi la zita jiyo de to baina sema his. But then was it? Kanju wa be. You didn't answer. You didn't talk is not was sema issue. You didn't answer. Was the start of the sema shibaji. You didn't talk is la be treated. We need to be treated. Yeah. 然后知道有点多的呢，
要确定，
然后知道有点，这把对，然后知道有点多的呢，我呢是这样子，没呢是知道有点要是的，对，是嘛的是，这起码是到对的，对啥人多啊？
然后简单有同就有的几把的话，
说的，嗯，
So when I talk about incontrovertible or controvertible with regard to each object of the modes of apprehensions, and then it also refers to the objects of engagement, right? In some other texts, instead of using this word object of the modes of apprehensions or objects of engagement, they use the word its main object or its primary object. So for Prasangika, whether it is a valid cognizer or not depends on whether the consciousness realizes its object of the modes of apprehensions or not. If it does realize its object of the modes of apprehensions, then it is a valid cognizer. So how Prasangika asserts a consciousness, whether it is a valid cognizer or not, it follows the way how it is known to the world. So if one consciousness realizes its object of the modes of apprehension, then it becomes a valid cognizer. So this is in accordance with how it is known to the world.
我的当然的前嘛是等到第是吧？那的好个我接，他刚才看到容忍的多把是，不要当时多把程度啊，容忍的多把的，不要当时多把日本他那什么嘛意思？什么嘛意思？我平时搞的是呢，看到让你知道觉得了，我查让你知道觉得，你个什么嘛意思？让你知道觉得多嘛意思？容忍的多比让你知道觉得可能多了，是吧？ 我让人知道觉得，对吧？我身上，我让人知道觉得，这个嘛的，那个嘛的，是吧？为了多少人，我的身上，中国人都把起码嘛的是。
让人知道有的日本人的，日本人那打发的。
哦，
日本人。
哦，那不要当中国人不要打发是吧？
So for Prasangika, again. Conceptual consciousness realizing sorry 日本人 sorry a conceptual consciousness apprehending a rabbit's horn is not a valid cognizer. For Prasangika, conceptual consciousness apprehending a rabbit's horn is not a valid cognizer. Similarly, conceptual consciousness apprehending sound as permanent or a permanent sound is also not a valid cognizer. So why these two conceptual consciousnesses are not valid cognizers? Because they do not realize its object of the mode of apprehension. So the object of the modes of apprehension for a conceptual consciousness apprehending rabbit's horn is a rabbit's horn. And the object of the modes of apprehensions for a conceptual consciousness apprehending a permanent sound is the permanent sound. So since these two consciousnesses do not realize it or their objects of the modes of apprehensions, therefore they are not a valid cognizer. And these two conceptual consciousnesses do not ascertain their object of the modes of apprehensions, and similarly, these two consciousnesses are controvertible with regard to its object of the modes of apprehensions. So because of this, they are not a valid cognizer.
That did that did not all my delivery. The Huran about that and about the yeah, wrong in no one Chema Hegel. Wrong in no one. That and about the wrong in no one Chema Hegel. That Chema Hegel. Wrong in no one Chema Hegel. That and about it. Wrong in no one Chema Hegel. Huran about it. No one Chema Hegel. Wrong in no one Chema Hegel. No one the injuries. No one the injuries. Or that and about the wrong in no one Chema. Who runs it about the wrong in no one Chema Hegel. Or wrong in no one Chema in that Chema in the Marisi. Not over the pay. That's the easy one. That's not the most of the that can't do around 2 way that you got on to top of the wrong no one Chema is. Wrong no one Chema, wrong no one is. Wrong no one the wounds. Wrong no one the wounded. It all of my deba more push of the rest of the
Rangi nawala ngung yure.
Wrong no one is. No
Nawate ngung yure.
one yes.
Rangi nawate.
No one thing just that this was whatever. But you know, you come up with a what that is all yes.
Atala matin ban yung to ki
You put it all.
di chatan ro di ngung yu sa de.
Oh, we just what they were.
Ya sa to to ya la right. Ya
You get to know, tomato.
tomato ba. So then again, we need to understand the assertion, Prasangika assertion as well. So we say that this conceptual consciousness apprehending a rabbit's horn and a conceptual consciousness apprehending permanent sound, they are not valid cognizers because of the reason that I mentioned just now. So however, Prasangika asserts that they are valid cognizers with regard to its appearance. So just now, the two conceptual consciousness that I mentioned just now, conceptual consciousness apprehending a rabbit's horn and conceptual consciousness apprehending a permanent sound, they are valid cognizer with regard to its appearance. Yeah. So even though they are valid cognizer with regard to its appearance, but they are not necessarily a valid cognizer. So for Prasangika, so I repeat. So these two conceptual consciousness, they are valid cognizer with regard to its appearance. So even though they are valid cognizers with regard to their object, to their appearances, so however, they are not necessarily valid cognizers. So for Prasangika, the word appearance, its appearance is a manifest object. So it's the appearance of its appearance is a manifest object. So manifest object also means that something that can be realized by the power of experience without depending on sign. So when first realizes an object that is not an object that is realized by the power of experience without depending on sign. So later we will talk about this as well. So I repeat. So when first realizing an object that is realized by the power of experience without depending on the sign is a manifest object.
Chema in the Migi Chepa Carnival, young Zita Jupiter Sema. Yes, same type of Losarwa. Sema in the Migi Chepa, young Zita Jupiter Sema in Sema. 如果让这多把的，不要当时多把这个，让你自己了，钱嘛也是，那个那完了钱嘛也是，那完了钱嘛一个也是，那就搞不起。
Yeah, so we have to understand for Prasangika, whether it is valid cognizers or not, it depends on whether it is a valid cognizer with regard to its objects of modes of apprehensions or not. So if it is a valid cognizer with regard to its appearance, it is not necessarily a valid cognizer. So you can tell the difference, right? So for Prasangika, whether it is a valid cognizers or not, depends on whether it is a valid cognizer with regard to its object of the modes of apprehensions or not. So even if it is a valid cognizer with regard to its appearance, it is not necessarily a valid cognizer.
我到底对话就是说，他看到的就是看到的就过了，因为怎么这么去在的，那生气就往起来出现我的也是，我说的，那你要这样的些题目我就把它说多啊，这边呢，很多我们都这个是，对，问题没写的，问题没写的，问题没写的这个去找你的嘛是吧？问题没写，问题没写的，问题没写是吧？问题没写是，就去嘛了，就我们听到我们了，那是对，我说我们这个是吧？我说讲多把的关系，那个对的吧是吧？他的他就那个出现了，那他就那出现了，实际就往对，我是这么出现，
申请
就往起那个，申请的往起那个出现了，出现一个就这个是呢，然后现在往他接的时候，清楚吗？现在往他嘛进去，去要嘛的是，
现在往，
现在往接了，我现在往这个当家的是，我你说的那出现来了我。
It says in the text, sense consciousnesses in sentient beings continuums are necessarily mistaken consciousnesses. So this is also an uncommon assertions in Prasangika system, different from others, from lower schools. For example, those lower schools such as Sampradaya, so they assert that sense conscious and eye consciousness apprehending white, and eye consciousness apprehending flower, and eye consciousness apprehending a fruit. So those are not mistaken consciousness for Sampradaya. So, and for them, those are direct perceivers. So, however, the same eye consciousness that I mentioned just now, the eye consciousness apprehending white, eye consciousness apprehending a flower and a pot, for Prasangika, they are mistaken consciousness. As it says in the text, sense consciousnesses in sentient beings continuums are necessarily mistaken consciousnesses. So why do Prasangika say that sense consciousnesses in sentient beings continuums are necessarily mistaken consciousness? Because those consciousnesses are together with specifically characterized appearance. Because this is the reason why. Because they are together with those consciousnesses are endowed with or together with specifically characterized appearance.
我谈句了呗，具体说的，我说对，可是呢，东北牛肉是对不？两家一起，说好比就是说，东北牛肉是对不？两家一起嘛，都是，两家一起的，我牛肉是对不？一起嘛，都把，甚至就是那个吃的时候的，牛肉是对不？你像我牛肉是两把小一起，我牛肉是两把小一起的话，一起也嘛都。东尼的，我说对不？东尼的最近两个小零息有的话，别打，东尼我送多比一些，我把东尼我做的一些，别毛都把他生气就是老看个出去的时候，这小事跑跑人家都是会给我呢，大家在说，
实际上这可以自己落
我看个出去，看些把肯定的出去的时候，
就往些就不买吧，给你得落去了，
容易吧？我看做对个呢。这个这些人，心里这个，那我的买地要买的是
2000那么
我2000那么他们几多呢？2000那么的
哦， 你正义就别让我的。
对，然后这个那就结巴结果的话，
那说，Yep，正义正义的，别闹。Yeah, so just now the terms that I mentioned just now is specifically characterize phenomena, right? So correct it as appearance as established by way of its own character. Appearance as established by way of its own character. Appearance as established by way of its own character, yeah. So because those consciousnesses are together with appearance, appearance as established by way of its own character, before they are mistaken consciousness. So again, for Prasangika, other than the exalted wisdom that directly realizes emptiness in Aya's continuum, or the exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise, meditating on emptiness. So other than these two, the exalted wisdom directly realizing emptiness in the Aya's continuum, or the exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise that on emptiness, meditative equipoise on emptiness, exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise on emptiness. So other than these two, all consciousnesses, not only sense consciousness. So in the text it says sense consciousnesses, right? So not only sense consciousnesses, all consciousnesses or all awarenesses in sentient beings' continuums are necessarily mistaken consciousness.
Okay, that's that's really tricky. The is what you see the non-dual too much new is like what you see that. I can't you see non-dual too much new. That you see the kind that you see non-dual too much new. You see so much. You see so that much is that tricky on it. But you get that you see what you get. That's something else you get. Sorry.
Yeah. You see the
you see what you get. That's something else you get. Something else you get. So the kind of matter are matter.
Sami nyamsha yeshe.
Sami nyamsha yeshe. No, we don't nyamsha yeshe. Sami nyamsha yeshe. That the two model, you see the two model. That kind of,现在you see个他直接让他的，
you see monk to what?
对的，那说对小娃那文字必须得长点，如果你的这些到，做对吧？比如啊，
文字必须长笔，懂的。
文字必须长笔，文字必须这个当然不对，你是，你这些有啊。要把这了对不对？那这些就是怎么的？那这些人他直接到高一点，
反正就多呗。
如果这些了，就是大概是多。
反正钱别挣。
这些
这样不接的话，
我直接的话，他直接了，你心里面是的话，但一些每一个的，每一个的，一些我这个三个两下去说的话，
Saminyamsha yeshe, yeah. Again, ni disla ye, papa gyugi, tongyin ngun su tobe yeshe, yang na, tongman la nyam shabe yeshe, deni ma do.
当年的这些两个是有些的，但当年是都有些。
de ma do.
三个，三个马里巴家马里巴的，马里巴的第一巴家的没马里也是。那给那个马里巴的，这里面巴也是。这个是在这两这里，然后基本上可能。
So why, other than the exalted wisdom that directly realizes emptiness in an Arya's continuum and exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise on emptiness are not mistaken consciousness for Prasangika, because these two exalted wisdoms are not affected by imprints of ignorance. Yeah, because they are not affected by ignorance and they are not affected by imprints of ignorance as well. So because of which these two are not said to be mistaken consciousness. So other than these two, all consciousnesses in sentient beings continuums are said to be mistaken consciousness. So the text also says that mental consciousnesses and yogic direct perceivers can be either mistaken or non-mistaken. So most of the mental consciousnesses are mistaken consciousness. So other than the exalted wisdom of the uncontaminated exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise. So other mental consciousnesses, such as memory consciousness that actually remembers blue, that is produced through being induced by through being induced by eye consciousness apprehending blue, then this is also an instant or example of being a mental consciousness and also a mistaken consciousness. So the example that I mentioned just now, later we are going to talk about this as well. Memory consciousness that actually remembers blue, that is produced through being induced by eye consciousness apprehending blue. So this is also an instant of being a mental consciousness and also mistaken consciousness.
For this, I see that too much need to. Anjo was not too much need to know. Anjo was not too much need to stand to go. Anjo was watching it. Yes, I mean, I say she. Anjo was watching it. Many say you are. What do you mean to be? And now, Anjo was you are. I say she watching it. That's I mean, I say she watching it. Anjo was you are.
Oh.
Anjo was you are. That did much work, yes. Did much work, yes. Anjo was there. Anjo was a tissue the color is not. Simple Gigi. Simple Gigi, try me that one was to be. Hey, me that one was to be GD. Hey, me that one to be GD. Anjo was a wood. Anjo was a 2 month Nisha.
수동 교육이 하위 미다바
hey, me that one was to be she.
문숨 또 비이시 문숨도 또 비이시
문숨도 그 단주엘이다. 진도 땅을 가면 또 단주.
수능이 교육이 처음 미다비 문숨도 또 비이시
어디 주시해서 근데
교시
어디 주시해서
yeah. And yogic direct perseverance can be either mistaken or non-mistaken also, right? So a yogic direct perseverance that is non-mistaken, the example for this is yogic direct perseverance that is an uncontaminated exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise. So is yogic direct perseverance that is non-mistaken. Yogic direct perseverance that is an uncontaminated exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise. So this is the example for yogic direct perseverance that is non-mistaken. And the example for a direct yogic direct perseverance that is mistaken, the example is exalted wisdom that directly realizes subtle impermanence in the continuums of an ordinary being. I repeat, exalted wisdom that directly realizes subtle impermanence in the continuum of an ordinary being is the example for a yogic direct perseverance that is mistaken. So there are two kinds of valid direct perceivers, in other words, direct valid cognizers. So conceptual valid direct perceivers, in other words, conceptual direct valid cognizers, and non-conceptual valid direct perceivers, in other words, non-conceptual direct valid cognizers. So for Prasangika, they assert the definitions of direct valid cognizers. So these valid direct perceivers, in other words, is direct valid cognizers, right? So the definition of a direct valid cognizer asserted by Prasangika is, being a valid cognizer, a knower that is incontrovertible with regard to object of comprehension, that is its object of the modes of apprehension, without explicitly depending on sign. I repeat, the definitions of a direct valid cognizer asserted by Prasangika is being a valid cognizer, a knower that is incontrovertible with regard to the object of comprehension, that is its object of the modes of apprehension, without explicitly depending on sign. I repeat again, the definition of a direct valid cognizer for Prasangika is being a valid cognizer, a knower that is incontrovertible with regard to the object of comprehension, that is its object of the modes of comprehension, without explicitly depending on sign.
Oh, dear. I can't know what to do. What the dog mother. Nothing to what was in the Chama said. That was a top of the tower. What the certain believe, but the good to see up. No one care what.
What
the certain believe, but what? No, what's it? Do they pursue? Then the Tanju became government. What years ago? What you mean is similar to Nila Sibura. Listen, similar to years ago.
So this definition of a direct valid cognizer asserted by Prasangika is different from that. It's different from that of lower schools, such as Sautrantika. So for Sautrantika, for example, they assert the definitions of a direct valid cognizers as a knower that is a new incontrovertible knower free from conceptualities. This is their assertion. Sautrantika's assertions on the definitions of a direct valid cognizers. So this is different from the definitions asserted by Prasangika that I mentioned just now. So for Prasangika, direct valid cognizer can be divided into two, a conceptual one and also a non-conceptual one.
Oh, the dang is the coaching is the maybe it's munition. Coaching is the drama that is picking back. The coaching is similar. Drama that is picking back to Shavuda. The coaching is similar.
So the illustration of the first referred to conceptual direct valid cognizers. So is the first illustration is second moment of an inferential cognizer realizing sound as impermanent.
Coaching is similar. Drama that is forming is similar.
So ini di sesi ni baru.
What the sesi itu orang sesi this. Itu coaching is semaris. Wah, ni orang nusu semua telah pe. Oh, ini maris wah. Coaching is semua lu dua.
Toba maingo.
Apa ini malas. Tahu mana lupa tahu di buru wah.
Toba maingo marwa.
Ini coaching is semua dua.
Toba maing mari.
Ini semaris. Itu tahu mana tu ke? Pada tu.
Toba dan tiasi.
Pada wah. Yang saya ini apa jadi dengan orang tahu mana sih na? Pada wah.
Jadi
Betul betul apa pada wah.
yang tinggi deh.
Oh, tinggi apa? Anda ada nusu semaris lu dua. Sama.
Biting you Allah, ini kasa ngonsu isema nanti atau apa maingo mari.
Maris. Nusu semaris lah. Coaching is semaris. Forming is semaris. Ni lu dua.
That's all. And the second illustration for a conceptual direct valid cognizer is remembering consciousness, actually remembering blue that is produced through being induced by a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue. So this is the second illustration of the first, which is conceptual direct valid cognizers. So if the same illustration, if you would, for lower schools such as Sautrantika, this remembering consciousness factually remembering blue that is produced through being induced by a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue is a conceptual consciousness. This remembering consciousness and blah blah blah. So here is remembering consciousness factually remembering blue that is produced through being induced by a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue for Sautrantika is conceptual direct valid cognizers. However, for Prasangika, this is not it is a conceptual consciousness. Yeah, it's a conceptual consciousness. Then, however, for sorry. So a remembering consciousness from this point up to this point for Sautrantika, that is a conceptual consciousness. It is not direct valid cognizers. So, however, for Prasangika, it is conceptual direct valid cognizers. Yeah. So because for Sautrantika, a direct valid cognizers is necessarily sorry. So for Sautrantika, if it is a direct valid cognizer, it is necessarily non-conceptual. However, for Prasangika, a direct valid cognizer is not necessarily a non-conceptual because there is conceptual direct valid cognizers. As you can see here, the divisions of direct valid cognizers. So Sautrantika says that if it is a direct valid cognizers, it is necessarily non-conceptual, right? So however, for Prasangika, it is not necessarily non-conceptual because they do assert conceptual direct valid cognizer. And illustrations of the second is a sense direct perceiver apprehending form.
원주의는 무슨 이거는 알수 있죠. 그런 무슨 의미가 되지도 않아. 나중 것을 때 원주 말했어. 원주 많이 비슷해. 다른서 고지랬어. 고지. 그 진도 나지. 엄마 또 어디 에 아까 따라뛰는 또 그래마다 또 동정.
That's okay. So direct valid cognizers and these valid direct perceivers, in other words, direct valid cognizers, are not necessarily directly perceivable objects because a yogic direct perceiver is necessarily not a directly perceivable object. This is because directly perceivable objects are mutually inclusive with manifest phenomena. So first, we have to understand that directly perceivable objects and manifest objects are mutually inclusive. Manifest phenomena or manifest objects. So these two are mutually inclusive. So, as I mentioned just now, a manifest object is something that when it's first realized, then it can be realized by the power of experience without depending on sign for an ordinary being. So an ordinary being can realize it by the power of experience without depending on sign when first realizing the object. So, however, this yogic direct perceiver, so the ninju monsu ina de ninju monsu ina de monsu mi chemaro.
무슨 이체마이나 무슨 이거 말이에요.
monsu mi chema ina de monsu igo mari. Kaisna
말했으나 난좀 왔을 때 이거 소리 되면 무슨 말이에요. 무슨 말이에요.
monsu mi chemaro.
무슨 이체마이요. 무슨 말이에요. 무슨 뭐에 비준세까지나 모듈이스. 무슨 원주 이거였어. 무슨 원주에 난좀 무슨 말이에요. 아이들 원주 말이에요. 원주 있으나 근데 지도마지 또 그랬어. 따라마지 완전 또 그랬어. 얘또 그거 말해서 난좀 있어.
So yeah. So because a yogic direct perceiver is necessarily not a directly perceivable object. So a yogic direct perceiver is a direct valid cognizer, but it is not a directly perceivable object. So why do we say that a yogic direct perceiver is not a directly perceivable object? Because it is a hidden object. It is not a directly perceivable object because it is a hidden object. So a hidden object, this yogic direct perceiver is a hidden object because it can only be realized by depending on sign. So it cannot be realized like the manifest object that without depending on sign. So a yogic direct perceiver is a hidden object that can only be realized by depending on sign, which is different from the manifest object. So a yogic direct perceiver is a direct valid cognizer, but it is not a directly perceivable object. Because of this reason, therefore, it says direct valid cognizer are not necessarily directly perceivable objects, because a yogic direct perceiver is necessarily not a directly perceivable object. Why is it not a directly perceivable object? Because it is a hidden object. A hidden object can only be realized by depending on sign.
네. 간다 난좀 것이 나간다. 무슨 많이 그래서 무슨 많이 그래서. 이제 무슨 다는 되더래. 난좀 것을 때 간다. 난좀 것을 나가서 다음에 가라가서 근데 가는 것은 또 거기 다 들어와. 이 차들이 무슨 전도나 집에 도마 보거나 간다. 따라 때문에 또 그래 마도 꼬치도 그려 그랬어. 야, 너도 지도 그 말에. 무슨 먼저 써야 돼. 다른 가서 뭐 야, 그거 인자 건강에 가서 문제 가기 봐. 같이 가러 와. 무슨 더 이제 무슨 더 문제 있어. 무슨 더 가서 문제 있지. 이제 세가 됐다 막 카툰 시기. 네. 너무 싫어. 저쪽으로 왜 거기로 와. 그다음에 이거 와. 근데 니시 와서 예, 뭐 이제 내가 뭐좀 듣는 거야 말. 제가 그냥 지금만 미신 거만 보여.
And this yogic direct perceivers can only be realized, cannot be realized by the power of experience without depending on sign. So in other words of saying this is, yogic direct perceiver is a hidden object that can only be realized by depending on sign. So this yogic direct perceiver is a hidden object because it is not a directly perceivable object. It is not a directly perceivable object because it is not a directly perceivable object because it is not a manifest object. So why do you say that it is not a manifest object? Because since it is not a directly perceivable object, it is also not a manifest object because directly perceivable object and manifest object are mutually inclusive. So therefore, this yogic direct perceiver is necessarily not a directly perceivable object nor a manifest object because it cannot be realized by the power of experience without depending on sign. So it must one must depend on sign in order to realize it. So previously, when I give examples for a manifest object, so the examples are form, sound, smell, taste, object of touch. Those are manifest objects because these objects can be directly known or can be directly realized without depending on sign or reason.
어디 다만 비오랑 아주 지시 있는 것은 제만 잡으려다 그러니까 단주하게 들리다 지시 있는 것은 제만 이것을 봐. 그러니까 엄마도 좀 적응도 하면서 그러니까 엄마가 지시 된 것은 제만 좀 봐라. 지시는 도시도 미리 봐서 그러고 봐. 도시도 미리 봐라. 도시도 미리 봐서 지시 재밌어요 그러고 봐. 좋아. 나단다 되는 가서 지시 있는 것은 제만 이거를 해서 좋아. 이게 로고. 너무 못하고 또 엄마는 제만 해도 좀 적응.
So another uncommon assertions in Prasangika system is subsequent cognizers are necessarily valid direct perceivers. In other words, direct valid cognizers. So in lower schools such as Sautrantika, they assert the definitions of subsequent cognizer is a knower that has a knower that realizes. A subsequent cognizer is a knower that realizes what has already been realized. So this is the assertions. This is the definitions of a subsequent cognizer for lower schools, such as Sautrantika. So, however, and definitely these subsequent cognizers in lower schools is not a direct valid cognizers. So, however, for Prasangika, subsequent cognizers are necessarily a direct valid cognizer.
그런데 엄마가 지시 세워대 세마치로 캐내고요 말이야. 나는 뭐 세마 캐내고요 막 지시서 세마. 그런데 단주에나 지시이나 간다 도스도 비바 이나야 세마를 해서 무슨 세마해. 와 무슨 세마해서.
생이야 다가는데
또 밀고 다가는데. 내가 그 세마를 했어. 세마 입에 전화되는데 스타치 또 마도 샤이마다 이게. 이리로 와. 나는 스타치 또 오라 지시되는 스타치 또 오라 와. 스타치 또 와서 무슨 세마를 했으라고. 지시는 것은 세마 입 처벌해서 넣은 것 같아도 이 처벌 제대로 다 엄마는 시고 막 된다 엄마는 세마스나 싸도 물어와 같이 하는 거네. 지시서데 그 세마를 수록해 빌려고. 지시는 세마 많이 쓸려잖아. 단주하게 지시나 세마를 했어. 무슨 세마를 했어. 세마 입 제대로 너는 진짜 주의 공부를 했어. 내가 너는 진짜 주의 세마를 했어.
So the definitions of subsequent cognizer, as I mentioned just now, is a knower that realizes what has already been realized, right? So this is commonly asserted by lower schools and also asserted the Prasangika, the tinggi waina yang di tosi to be yang and also asserted by Prasangika as well. Prasangika also assert that a knower that realizes what has already been realized is as the definitions of subsequent cognizer. So the difference between lower school, the assertions in lower school and Prasangika is Prasangika do not assert subsequent cognizer as a direct valid cognizer. It's not a valid cognizer. So because for them, there are definitions of for something to be a valid cognizer, it must be a new incontrovertible knower, right? So because of this, a knower that realizes what has already been realized, so it doesn't fit or qualify the definitions. So therefore, for lower school, subsequent cognizer is not a valid cognizer. However, the definitions of a valid cognizer asserted by Prasangika is an incontrovertible knower without the word new. So and then for Prasangika, subsequent cognizer are necessarily valid cognizers or direct valid cognizers because it realizes its objects of the modes of apprehension. Subsequent cognizers are, in the text it says, subsequent cognizers are necessarily valid direct perceivers, in other words, direct valid cognizers. When inferential cognizers are divided, they are four. Inference or inferential cognizer through the power of the fact or by the power of the fact. Inference through renown, inference through analogy, and inference through belief. And inference through renown and inference through analogy are included in inference by the power of the fact. So the first one is inference by the power of the fact. So the inference by the power of the fact is an inferential cognizer that realizes slightly hidden phenomena. So the first one, inference by the power of the fact is an inference or is an inferential cognizer that realizes slightly hidden phenomena. So an example is an inferential cognizer that realizes sound as impermanent. An inferential cognizer that realizes sounds as impermanent is an example for the first one, inference by the power of the fact, or inference that realizes slightly hidden phenomena. And the second one is inference through renown. Actually, this we have learned this before in Lorik, awareness and knower class. So we have learned about these inferential the divisions of inferential cognizers, and example for this as well. And the example for the second one is inference through renown. So I do not remember exactly the words, but it's something like moon is suitable to be expressed by the term rabbit bearer because it exists among the objects of knowledge. So it's something like that. So we can search, look for the illustrations mentioned in awareness and knower. So the illustration is there. So something like this. Moon is suitable to be expressed by a rabbit bearer is suitable to be expressed by the term moon because it exists among the objects of knowledge. So the special one is the third one, inference through analogy.
我说我不能把那同心把这把那前面也什么就说，那是把面同我那把那等到那边的哩，我们起码的看到，
我这么切，
哦，把面同的话，把
嗯，
面同我那把那等到那不比，起码的边人家是什么事就的，
所以旁边的痛呢，
把面同的
痛，
那把那等到那不比起码有了，把那等到不比起码有了，哦，这边人家是什么事就不比起码。
So the third one is a special one, which I have not, talk about this before. Inference through analogy or inferential cognizer through analogy. So the example for this, an easy example for this is, one has seen a cow before. So one has seen a cow before and recognized it as a cow. And then later, the same person saw, I checked the dictionary and the dictionary says it's called Indian bison. It looks like a cow. So when this person first sees a cow, then he recognizes it as a cow. And then later when this person see Indian bison, then there is a valid cognizer that realizes that it is similar to a cow. Yeah, so this example is when a person first see a cow and recognize it as a cow, and then later when this person sees an Indian bison, then there is a valid cognizer that realizes it is similar to a cow, or thinks it is similar to cow.
我跟你讲，那样家去别小问呢，你们的电报没法人都是，你们的电报没法人下，而是呢，苏联那些人都是没有那个苏联，电报没法人，是，你去别小问，你们的电报没法人都别，苏联那些人都是别苏联那些，那别苏联的别，反正那我那些没多啊，是，你到电那些你们的那我那电报没法人不多啊，是，我跟你。苏联了别下来，当然了，弟弟，有个地方可能就是苏联那些人，那不不起码的，给人家是起码的。
Another example or illustration for inference through analogy is the analogy or the example is like reflection. So reflections of a face in the mirror appears as a face, right? It doesn't exist as a face. So through this analogy, and one develops an inferential cognizer that realizes a sprout appears as truly established or truly existent, but sprout doesn't truly establish or doesn't truly exist. So such inferential cognizer is developed. So again, the example is the reflections of a face in the mirror. So reflections of a face in the mirror appears as a face, but it doesn't exist as a face, right? Similarly, a sprout appears to be truly existent. It doesn't exist truly existent. Yeah, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist truly, or it is not truly existent. So through the analogy, one develops the inference.
我记住啊，对以前结巴是话，当然很多国际都是结巴是那个的，我是就是那个是就是这个的，在人民龙去经济的结构的弄到的，对一个了没了的，他就是他自己用的那个，他看到有一些结巴可是就在说，那看到很多国际都是结巴是那个，很多国际都是结巴，我觉得，
点我嘛点啦，
那么确实，
So and the fourth one is inference through belief. So inference through belief is also called an inferential cognizer that realizes very hidden phenomena.
那就我是刚才这边结巴的，别人家是结巴，你看我都结巴，跟他们就是一路联系过是吧？这边结巴，别人家结巴，你看我都结巴，跟他们联系。
And inference through renown and inference through analogy are included in inference by the power of the fact.
那对了的，但前面的让你学了嘛，出嘛这的这么多结巴的这么多把它你联系，对了的多，他的感觉人家的没事需要这样的，前面的让你学了嘛这。 마디 저거 만주고 말했어. 세마 이랑게 제일 중기지 요래서 보다. 세마 이게 랑 제일 중기지 요래서. 뭐랑 제일 중기지 요래서. 그래서 나마다도 제바데 나마다 제바데 내가 랑 제일 중기에 가서 나마다도 그래서 와 나마다 이게 이게 나마다 받아야 어디 오늘 세마 이제
담이다발라 티시레
주시에 이게 해서
담이다발라 티시레
주시에 나마다도 제바데 나마다 받아 주시에 해서
So, Prasangika continue. As it says in the text, if it is a valid cognizer, it is not necessarily non-mistaken with respect to its determined object, because an inferential cognizer realizing sound as impermanent is a mistaken consciousness with respect to sound as impermanent. So again, this is uncommon assertions by Prasangika. So Prasangika says that if it is a valid cognizer, it is not necessarily non-mistaken with regard to its determined object, because they are valid cognizers mistaken with regard to its determined object. The example given here is an inferential cognizer realizing sound as impermanent. So for Prasangika, it is a mistaken consciousness with regard to sound as impermanent.
이 마도 말에 마도 말 또를 했을 때 영화 영화를 쓰고다. 나도 진짜 엄마 또는 다시 이거 주자는 또 말와.
마토바 오마로.
또를 했을 때 맞다 봐. 대박에는 제일 그걸 비나가. 또를 했을 때 영화 했어.
以前又来做人那样，
또를 했어.
以前又来做我。
我写또를 했어.
Yeah, so Prasangika asserts that even though it is mistaken with regard to its determined object, is not necessarily it does not necessarily not realizing it. So in other words of saying this is, even though it is mistaken with regard to its determined object, it realizes its determined object. Yeah, so it says that even though it is for Prasangika, so even though it is mistaken with regard to its determined object, it doesn't mean that it doesn't realize its determined object. Yeah, so in other words of saying this is, it realizes its determined object. Yeah. So again, this assertion is different from the assertions in lower schools, because for Prasangika assert that even though it is mistaken with regard to its determined object, it realizes its determined object. So there is no contradictions between these two. Even though it is mistaken, but it realizes its object, there is no faults, and there is no contradictions. Yeah, 추시인경,
그
유대 독이오리.
이게 동그래. 나랑 지금도 동그래서 담아서 동그래서. 그럼 타발라 투리도 이나 담아 타바 동그래서 땡겨와 요 말에서 왔다간다. 담아 타바 또 와서 담아 타발라 제말에서.
다음에 또 인자디. 다음에 타발라 대체말이.
타발라 제말에서.
Yeah, so for Prasangika, so even though it is a mistaken consciousness, mistaken consciousness with regard to the sound as impermanent, however, it realizes its object. So even though it is a mistaken consciousness with regard to sound as impermanent, it realizes its determined object. And its determining object is impermanent sound or sound as impermanent. So because of realizing its because of realizing its determining object, the sound is impermanent. Therefore, it is a valid cognizer with regard to impermanent sound or sound as impermanent. So this is different from lower school again. That lower school they assert that if it is mistaken consciousness with regard to a phenomenon, it is not a valid cognizer. So, however, this is Prasangika that Prasangika asserts differently. So, even though it is a mistaken consciousness with regard to its determined object, it realizes its determined object. Because of this reason, it is a valid cognizer with regard to its determined object. For example, sound as impermanent or impermanent sound. So again, this is another common assertions by Prasangika. In the text it says, if it is a consciousness, it necessarily realizes its object of comprehension because the mental image of a rabbit's horn. So mental image, in other words, is meaning generality. Because the mental image or meaning generality of a rabbit's horn is the object of comprehension of a conception branding the horns of a rabbit. And the mental image, again, is the meaning, in other words, is meaning generality. So the mental image of sound as permanent is the object of comprehension of conception, apprehending sound as permanent. So here, so if it is a consciousness, it necessarily realizes its object of comprehension because the mental image or meaning generality of a rabbit's horn is the object of comprehension of a conception, branding the horns of a rabbit. So there are two conceptions or conceptual consciousness here. So the first one is conceptions or conceptual consciousness, branding the horns of a rabbit. And the second one is a conception or conceptual consciousness, branding sound as permanent. So these two consciousnesses realizes its objects of comprehension. So these two consciousnesses, conception apprehending the sounds, apprehending the horns of a rabbit, and conception apprehending sound as permanent. So even though they are wrong consciousnesses, but even though they are wrong consciousnesses, they realizes its object of comprehension. So its object of comprehension can be understood as its appearance. Yeah. So its object of comprehension can be understood as its appearance. So not only that, these two consciousnesses realizes its object of comprehensions, they are valid cognizer. They are direct valid cognizer with regard to their appearances. So even though they are wrong consciousnesses, they are direct. So even though they are wrong consciousnesses, they are valid cognizers, direct valid cognizer with regard to their appearances. So number 6, modes of asserting selflessness. We assert the core selflessness of persons, that is, a person's emptiness of being self-supporting or substantially existent. In other words, is a person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent. And a subtle selflessness of persons, that is, a person's emptiness of true existence. Yeah, so for Prasangika, when Prasangika talks about selflessness of person or a subtle selflessness of person, so they mainly talk, they refer to person's emptiness of true existence. So whenever they talk about selflessness of person or subtle selflessness of person, we talk about a person's emptiness of true existence, or person being empty of true existence. Yeah. So Prasangika talks about selflessness of person or subtle selflessness of persons. So you can say that as they talks about person's emptiness of true existence, or subtle emptiness on the basis of person. So when they talk about this subtle selflessness of person, it talks about the subtle emptiness on the basis of person. Yeah, so they proceed a core selflessness of phenomena, that is the emptiness of a coarse object composed of less particles, and the valid cognizer apprehending it being of different substances. In other words, being a different substantial entity. So this being of different substance, in other words, is being different substantial entity. And a subtle selflessness of phenomena, that is the emptiness of true existence of the aggregates, person's basis of imputation.
동시권의 제발에마다 가시권의 제발 지금 말해야지 문제돼. 뭐 그때 지금 뭐지 시간자가 되는 가서 되는 거버리 가서 다음에 참고 다시 무소리 된다 가서 되는 거버리 좀 다음에 참고 그래서 그러니까 다 탄조가 온다 가서 앞에 있을 때다 주다 오마 준다고 만다 그래서 그런 거.
So again, this assertion is different from the lower schools as well. So Prasangika says that the two subtle substances are differentiated according to their basis of emptiness and not according to their objects of negation. The refutations of the object of negation through existence on the base person is the subtle substances of persons, and the refutations of the object of negation through existence upon the base, the aggregates, and so forth, with the subtle substances of phenomena.
다들어도 휴 공소지도 가서 된다 가서 치다네 참으스. 와 이게 공소지도 지 간사지도 가서 된다 가서 간사 다음에 참고 이게 공소지도 가서 된다 가서 예 다음에 참고 되니까 가서 동시 개발하자마자 가서 기본적으로 개발지요. 와 그거 지면 와 아니 그거 저희가 나한테 개발하고 와 공시권에 개발하고 막 가시 개발하고 와 한국이 공시권에 개발지 마도 가시를 개발지만 가시를 알아요 말했어요. 와 뭐라 개발요 말했어. 이제 간사기 다음에 아무나 다음에 참으니까 공부니 되니까 앞에 잘아요 말했어요. 와 그다음에 다음에 참으다. 이 다음에 참으니까 다음에 참으니까. 네가 다음에 참으랬어.
So for Svatantika system, so Svatantika they differentiate these two substances by way of the So for Prasangika system, in Prasangika system, Svatantika they differentiate two substances by way of their object of negation, not by way of their basis of emptiness. So, however, in Prasangika system, whether it is these two substances, selflessnesses, subtle substances of person and subtle substances of phenomena, are both subtle substances. So they do not, Sangika do not differentiate two substances based on their object of negations. Rather, they differentiate these two substances based on their basis of emptiness. So in terms of object of negation for Prasangika, in terms of object of negation, there is no difference in terms of their subtlety.
데뷔 동바데 간다게 다음에 하고 말에 간다 데뷔 동바데 간다게 다음에 치 다음에 와 간다게 돈이 와 그래서이나 간다 디버티 통화들어 간다 돈이 들어와 간사랑한테 데뷔
간사기 때문에 간사기 때문에
치 다음에 와 치 다음에 와 간사랑한테 데뷔 데뷔 동바데 간다게 다음에 양지방에 가샤게 제바샤를 막 동시 개발지 하고도 동시 개발지고도 한국의 동시군의 제바샤를 가샤 제바지요 말해서
그래서 제육이 동바디 취어를
간다게 다음에
간사기
간사라도 제주도 동바데 간다게 다음에 참고 와라지비
간사기
다음에 참고 간다 데뷔 동바데 동바데 동
간사기 다음에 라바 여기 다음에
치 다음에 간 이와 치 다음에 간다게 다음에 제바다 가샤 보니 그거 이제 그러면 도시 개발을 말했어. 간다 데뷔 동바데 간다 데뷔 동화들이 간다 그 다음에 바데 간다 저기 지기 동화. 이니 동시고로 간다 집에나 가샤 로가리 와. 가샤 로가리 와.
간사랑게 제육이 그 동바디 간사기 다음에 참모 근데 이제 간사 데뷔 그 동바디 근데 이게 다음에 참모 저기 다음에 So this is Prasangika assertions on this is different from Svatantika Madhyamika. So Svatantika Madhyamika they asserts the emptiness, person's emptiness of true existence as the substances of phenomena, and Svatantika they asserts person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent as the subtle substances of person. I repeat, for Prasangika, so they differentiate these two substances based on the object of negation, not based on the basis of emptiness. So for Svatantika Madhyamika, person's emptiness of true existence is asserted as the substances of phenomena, and a person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent is asserted as the subtle substances of person. So this shows that Svatantika, they differentiate two substances based on the object of negation, not based on the basis of emptiness. So Svatantika, they other than the words that I mentioned just now, person's emptiness of true existence is asserted as substances of phenomena. So in other words of saying this is the refutations of true existence on the basis of person is asserted as substances of phenomena by Svatantika Madhyamika. I repeat. So the first version that I mentioned just now is person's emptiness of true existence, right? So this is asserted as substances of person by Svatantika Madhyamika. Another way of saying this is refutations of true existence on the basis of person is the substances of phenomena. Then the second one is person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent is the subtle substances of person, right? So another way of saying this is the refutations of self-sufficient, substantially existent on the basis of person is considered as subtle substances of person by Svatantika. So you can see that the word persons exists, right? The word persons is common to two substances. So that's why it says that because Svatantika do not differentiate two substances based on the basis of emptiness, but rather it is differentiated by the object of negations or the refutation of object of negations. So this is different from Prasangika. Prasangika asserts that these two selflessnesses are differentiated based on their basis of emptiness, and not instead of their object of negation. So then, and then Prasangika also asserts that the two subtle self-graspings are differentiated according to their observed object and not according to their modes of grasping. Modes of grasping, another word for this is modes of apprehension. So because observing the base person and grasping it as truly existent is the subtle self-graspings of persons, and observing a person's basis of imputation, aggregates, and so forth, and grasping them as truly existent is the subtle self-graspings of phenomena.
공부 대박 두 번째 받아. 그래서 대박 두 번째 기빠해서. 이는 비단 제발 말했어. 니가게 맞아 대박 두 번째 그래 공부 대박 두 번째네. 니가 단 기빠해서. 단 제발 말했어. 그럼 니빠 제발해서 니빠지 그래서 니 한번은 이와. 되니 제발 보내 때가다. 이 맞아 그걸 더 이거 되게 하고 있어.
So two self-graspings are differentiated based on their observed object or objects of observation, and not based on their modes of grasping or modes of apprehensions. Because their modes of apprehensions or modes of graspings are the same, which is grasping it as truly existent, grasping them as truly existent, and grasping it as truly existence. So the modes of grasping or the modes of apprehensions are the same. It's just that the object of observations is different. So if the object of observation is person, then it is it's the self-grasping of person. So if it apprehends or grasps, if it observes the object is aggregates, then it becomes the self-grasping of phenomena. Yeah. So if it observe the object is if the observed object is a person, then it is a self-grasping of person. If the observed object is aggregates, then it is self-grasping of phenomena.
야야 다들이 대자 다 저런데 슈트다 슈트로 시다 저다 제일 진짜 길을 차로 뮤스 상마를 때 저다 슈트하고 싶어 말하고 선수를 배우고 싶어서 상마 슈트 들어와 근데 어떤다 그 제일 진짜 지유스 그가 저한테 좋아하는 거다 이제 비오나 되게 되는 게 있어 이게 차로 뮤스.
Yeah, so I will stop here. So I've seen that you all have put in lots of effort in studying this, in learning tenets. So next coming class is the last class of tenets. It's the last tenet class. So please continue to put in effort in studying this. And if you have any questions, kindly ask in class. So sorry that today we have no time for question and answer.
That was a gate or the chicken party for the water. Consulting with the two to the TV to massage one of the chamber and we so you can in the one so good but on the cutting over the schedule of some of some the answer to me the pen imagine some one only you do kill a conduct more than the years of my own and you want she never my own but you don't talk about a she and what you talk about 그 간직이나 고등학교로 같이 배우다 매겨보라 인도부터 같이 이나 마스터 같이 심리에 되지 무슨 또 봐요 어디 우리가 누가 change.
We conclude with dedication. We dedicate the roots of virtue to Buddha Dharma to flourish and for all sentient beings to experience happiness in general. In particular, we dedicate these roots of virtue to all upholding holders of Buddha's teaching, mainly His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to live eons long, excellent health condition, and all their holy wishes and enlightened activities be accomplished instantaneously and spread in all directions. In particular, we dedicate these roots of virtue to our beloved teacher, Gyaltsab Lama Zopa Rinpoche, endowed with great kindness. May may Rinpoche's holy wishes be accomplished instantaneously, and may the unmistaken reincarnations of Rinpoche be swiftly returned and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma for the sake of teachings and sentient beings, just like before, so that we will have the opportunity to receive the precious teaching from you again. And we also dedicate these roots of virtue to world peace, and may excellent happiness prevail in the world. May wars, conflicts, pandemic, disaster, natural disaster that flows by four elements be pacified immediately. We also dedicate these roots of virtue especially to all sentient beings in general, and especially to those sentient beings who help others, such as doctors, nurses, and those who help others financially. May they live long, good health, and may all their good wishes be accomplished.
Sabe que wa de ten dang zhou wa kun la kan be la xie ba ji zhe lo zang zha hua yi de bie ni bo ren zhou se jie zhou jiang shu sen zhou ren bo jie ma jie huang na ji biu ji jie ba niang ba mian ba yang gong de gong do he wa shu jian mei ba yu ji da qian ba dang gong do sang bo de ya de jian de de da jie su da lu jie ge wa de da dang jie rao du 我且马且巴当起九且且巴娘巴没巴呀，我连工作没巴说，对面他话的我且马且巴当起九且且巴娘巴没巴呀，我连工作没巴说。你理解是多久别让这些事情看见见对人将那被我真正搞错了，我的说你对人就说你的观点变得把对吧？刚才就没有上对一行了，观点就没真正搞错了，我的说对些的多说，大概电话这些年让中国上交啊，也是就把这让叫新的干嘛的会对对对把准备给你说，我说这边都点人或这些到准备直接给完了，那两位兄弟的国家先准备，其实那么说话的每天话的准备过去不。 每天到晚就说啊，一天到起都这把这边路都不喜欢是的一年方面到就说看出进拿当，可是那就中间老婆钱都没得别样个啥呗，给啥东西别都有一些就是。 一个微信刚那边打电话嘛，就为你，天天生活毕竟要做一下别世界报道等于。